empathic
Oh,
listening
the
versus,
definition. Sure,
versus
sure.
active and passive. It's a type of listening focused on understanding and sharing the emotions and feelings of the speaker.
Yeah.
Empathic listeners try to connect with the speaker on an emotional level and provide support and validation. Cathy, you are very, very good at this.
Oh, thank you.
I can be good at this, but it's not my default. My default is, how do we solve the problem?
Answers.
So, yeah, answers. And probably because I feel like I'm valued upon my ability to solve problems. And I think your value is based on your ability to connect with the other.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And if I could snap my fingers and be a listener like you or a listener like me, I would be a listener like you in a second.
That's so nice.
It's true. And I think most people are not, including me, are not that good of listening through an empathic lens.
Well, I think our ego gets in the way. I think that we really want to supply the perfect answer that makes everybody feel better. And I think our history gets in the way, where we start to want to win the conversation. We start to want to point out, like, my daughter, my oldest daughter is a global studies major and my middle daughter is a political science major. So they bring me a lot of information, right? They tell me a lot of things, some things that I don't know. Like I feel like JC has more information about what's going on in the world than I do. She's much more current with it's like things that I may know, but she knows it more in depth, and my point is that if I was like, well, wait, I'm older, I know more. Yeah, that's really nothing. It's really, if I'm trying to demonstrate that I'm better than them, then our conversation is not only going to be very stunted, but it's going to be kind of a win-lose situation. Like someone's got to be right in this conversation and someone's got to be wrong.
Well, 2 weeks ago, we did a discussion on the 7 habits.
Yeah.
Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think because I overheard your conversation with JC, and I think a few times you're like, JC, you're studying this, so you know more
better
about this than
Yeah.
I do. And I think as a parent, it's really hard to like let go of the idea that our kid might know more than we do.
Well, and here's the thing, the things where I really jump in and join them, if it be, be around these big issues that we're talking about, is where I will validate, yes, I remember, they'll tell me a story and I'll say, yes, I remember when I was in college and then there was a war and I will tell my story that I feel like engages, it's not saying, no, your story's wrong, this is the right story. It's a validation of I had a similar experience, or, oh, isn't that interesting? It was different for us,
Yeah.
and I'll point out, because I think a few things happen there. Number one, it demonstrates that I'm listening because I'm finding a point that matches up. Number two, I'm also pointing out that it might be changing or that we're having similar experiences. It's, again, another connective. And number three, it is good for me in a conversation. So it's not just a dumping one way to engage in way, because there's a difference in needing to have all the information and absolute answers and being completely silent through the whole conversation. Like empathic listening, even though there's a lot of elements, you said at the very beginning, you were saying Frank is such an exceptional listener. And you said sometimes he's just really quiet. And I think that's a fantastic skill. You don't always have to fill the void. You can sit and listen. But sometimes, like I will say, because this, so I am an external processor. So when I'm telling Todd a story and it's very emotional, and if I kind of say it all and then he just sits there, I'm like, hello.
Anybody home, McFly?
So I appreciate the fact that you're like, no, see, I'm proving I'm listening, but it's not.
You didn't feel it.
Not at all, because I just feel like you're like, yep, you're left with those feelings instead of like, I feel like we've talked about this a million times, but I have so many movie moments that I love with listening, but one of my favorites is in The Breakfast Club. When Allison tells Andy that he said, what do they do to you? And she says, they ignore me. And he says, yeah. And he doesn't get ignored. He's not agreeing with, oh yeah, I get ignored too. He's actually overhyped in his home. But what he's saying to her is those feelings. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
You can validate somebody else's point of view without necessarily agreeing with that person. And I also want to mention the idea of, and we'll kind of go in and out of different types of listening, but active listening is something I'm trying to get better at because you're an external processor, sweetie, you can go on for a while. And for me and my brain, it's hard to take it all in. And sometimes I use the term mindful interruption. I want to, because if you or anybody else is talking to me for longer than 3 or 4 minutes, I simply can't retain it. Plus my brain kind of floats away a bit. So I'll say, okay, hold on a second. I just want to make sure I'm tracking you. I heard you say that you're struggling with blah, 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 blah. And then like, now let's move forward. But like even that pause, and sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't, because we've been taught to interrupting is rude. And I'm trying to like lean into the idea of if you can interrupt in a conscious way to make sure that you're tracking the person and that they feel like I'm understanding them versus a monologue where I'm just like an audience member of whatever it is the other person's saying. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, and again, this is like a reach because I do understand sometimes I just talk for a really long time and I know that can be difficult. And, you know, this is not, I'm not saying I'm right in this, but I don't know if you have to take in everything I'm saying because, you know, I am externally processing, which means that you don't have to track every single thing I'm saying. Because what do I usually do? I'll say, and then this happened, and then I was overwhelmed. Well, I'm actually not that overwhelmed. It just felt overwhelming because, so you don't need to go back and be like, wait, she was overwhelmed. Oh, but now she's not overwhelmed. You can meet me where I am at every moment. And again, this is hard too. But when I as a therapist, sometimes people go on for 10 minutes and I don't think to myself, I have to remember everything they said.
What about when your client is kind of in a loop though, and they just kind of keep repeating?
You want to interrupt,
right?
A lot of that is, you know what, and sometimes that's reflection where when someone's like you said, they're just going in a cycle and they keep going back to the same point. It's like, I do things like totally. I totally hear that. And that's where we were before. And then it gives me, so it's less about, I'm going to stop you because I think the thing, it's so, you know, it's kind of like the relational self-awareness when we're talking about empathic listening. I kind of always think of how I would want someone to stop me in a conversation. And if somebody was a little too like, I'm going to stop you right there because I'm not tracking. It can be a little condescending.
Right.
And again, I don't think you're condescending. And I don't even think you're.
Well, there's times when I'm not doing a good job listening, and not that I'm condescending about it, but the bottom line is the reason you're sharing something with me is to connect. And if I am in, you know, there's that awesome part in Inside Out.
Yeah.
The dad is thinking about the hockey game when mom and child are having a kind of an intense discussion. That happens to my brain often.
I know. And you know, the thing that is interesting with you, and I think we're able to have some humor with this, is I will sometimes be telling you something very serious and you'll interrupt me and be like, look at that squirrel.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I do get it because our brains do that. I mean, literally, he will be like, look at that bird or that squirrel. Like, I'm not being like Doug from Up. Like, he literally will, I'll be like, and then I was really scared. And Todd will go, oh my God, look at that. And and to me, and then he'll say, oh, 2 things. One of 3 things happens.
Did that dog just say hi there?
Oh, yes.
Bruh!
My name is Doug. I have just met you, and I love you. My master made me this collar. He is a good and smart master, and he made me this collar so that I may talk. Squirrel!
What's funny is I just interrupted you to do the Doug the talking dog.
I'm cool with that. I'm not, that's totally fine. I think it's about the seriousness. Like if I'm telling you kind of a silly story, I don't really care because I'm just probably just talking.
Yeah.
But if I'm like, okay, and I'm about to get to like the big climax of this conversation and you're like, because you'll do one of 3 things. Either you'll say, oh, I'm sorry, finish. I totally interrupted you, which, you know, I appreciate. Number 2, you will forget that I was even saying anything.
You forget that I interrupted you. Yeah. And just move on.
And you just move on.
Yeah.
And then that's, to me, the feeling I have is embarrassment.
Yeah.
No, it's embarrassment.
Oh, okay.
It's not I mean, I'm not like, wow, you're dismissive. My feeling is embarrassment. And I don't know if everybody feels that way, but sometimes I think might be a challenge.
Because you're opening yourself up. You're letting your heart open.
Yeah.
And if I directly or indirectly or intentionally or unintentionally distract, just move on to something else, you're like open, and then you close real quick.
And I feel dumb, you know, and that the feeling, I'm putting this in air quotes, the feeling dumb is embarrassment, because you're like, I don't think he cares to hear this. And then if you forget to go back to it, it's weird. I don't love saying, can I finish what I was saying? Because you obviously are demonstrating you didn't care.
And there are times when I'm like, okay, let's pick up where we left off. And
sometimes.
you're like, sorry, window closed.
And what I'll say, like last time this happened, I think we were on a walk and Todd did squirrel. And he said, Todd did squirrel. And I said, you go, okay, hold on. You go, sorry about that. Go ahead and finish. And I go, no.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? And I wasn't, I said, I just can't right now, because it was kind of like vulnerable and I feel dumb.
Yeah.
And I will come back to it later. I said, but that it's not that could so easily, I think you and I have a comfort with each other where I am not trying to harm you.
For sure.
I am not trying to be like, no, you're a jerk and you missed your chance. It's more like, I can't pull that story up now because it was kind of,
well, you're too exposed.
I'm too,
and you shut
I'm
it down.
embarrassed.
Now, what's interesting